First of all, I wanted to be like him, I wanted to dress like him, I wanted to look like him. You know, I took my hair and had it all done up with the curl.
I know it and you know it, but we need a good picture. And the way to get good pictures, as I rather obliquely hinted earlier in the evening, is to get back into the Mona Lisa business.
He is probably one of the most honest individuals I've ever met in my life, and I honor his friendship and what he did for me as a performer, and as a person too, because he put my head straight in a lot of areas.
He was a great man. I knew him for years.
They were two of the most powerful men in show business. Frank Sinatra, the voice that ruled America, and Sammy Davis Jr., the unstoppable entertainer who broke barriers at every step. On stage, they looked inseparable. Off stage, their friendship was tangled in rumors of loyalty, betrayal, and control. Sinatra opened doors for Davis that no one else could, but he also slammed them shut when Davis crossed him. After 4 decades of laughter, fights, and whispered controversies, Sinatra said just one line about Sammy Davis Jr. that left fans stunned and forced the world to rethink everything about the Rat Pack's most complicated bond. It all began in 1941, backstage at the Michigan Theater in Detroit. Destiny brought together two men who, on paper, had nothing in common. Frank Sinatra was stepping into the kind of stardom that changes a person's life forever. He was fronting the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra, his velvet voice pulling screaming crowds of young women who fainted at the sound of a single note. Sinatra was already learning how to command a room with more than just music. His confidence, his presence, the way he carried himself. People sensed it, even before he was officially crowned the Voice. Sammy Davis Jr., on the other hand, was only 16 years old, hustling every night with the Will Maston Trio, a small-time vaudeville act that mixed song, dance, and comedy in the hopes of catching a little attention from audiences. He was just another young black entertainer fighting to make it in an America where the odds were stacked against him from the moment he stepped on stage. During intermission that night, fate tossed them into the same break room. Sinatra was already being treated like royalty, while Davis was used to being overlooked. But what happened in that room would spark a bond that lasted decades. Sinatra, ignoring the unspoken rules of segregation, split his sandwich with Davis and struck up a casual conversation. To Frank, it may have seemed like nothing more than an ordinary act of kindness, but to Sammy, it was extraordinary. In the early 1940s, it was almost unheard of for a white headliner to sit down and share food with a black teenager just starting his career. Theaters, hotels, and restaurants were still separated by color. Racism was the system. Yet here was Sinatra, not delivering a lecture or a speech, but simply treating Davis as an equal. Sammy never forgot that moment. He had already been quietly idolizing Sinatra from a distance. He kept a notebook filled with clippings of Sinatra articles, which he showed proudly to his grandmother. It was Sinatra's freedom that fascinated him. Davis saw in Sinatra a model of what black entertainers were almost never allowed to have: stage power, the confidence to speak his mind, and the ability to be respected by the public without apology. For Davis, sharing that sandwich was like peeking behind the curtain at a life he wanted for himself. He studied Sinatra's stagecraft, the way he held a microphone, the way he walked into a room and instantly owned it. Davis was looking to learn the mechanics of respect, something he knew could be the key to surviving in a business that treated most black artists as disposable. Neither of them knew it then, but that small break room encounter planted a seed that would grow into one of Hollywood's most talked about friendships. It was a bond forged not by a business deal or a stage contract, but by a moment of unexpected equality. In the years to come, that friendship would lift Davis to heights few black entertainers had ever reached, while also dragging him into controversies, humiliations, and power struggles he could never have anticipated. Because being close to Frank Sinatra meant opportunity, but it also meant playing by Sinatra's rules. And as Davis would soon learn, staying in Sinatra's orbit could change your life, but it could also cost you dearly. Just a few years after that first meeting with Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr.'s world was turned upside down. In 1944, he was drafted into the U.S. Army during World War II. For a young black performer, the stage was replaced with something far more brutal: survival in a system that seemed designed to break him. Davis was sent to the front lines of battle. His weapon was entertainment, but that did not shield him from the racism that infected every part of military life at the time. From the moment he arrived, he became a target. White soldiers mocked him, beat him, and threatened him daily. To them, his talent meant nothing. His skin color defined him before he could even open his mouth. One night, a group of soldiers cornered him in a bathroom and smashed a bottle across his face, leaving scars that would never completely fade. In the face of that hatred, Davis turned to the only weapon he had, his ability to perform. He began entertaining the soldiers, singing, dancing, and telling jokes in makeshift barracks shows, not for money, but for survival. The more he performed, the less dangerous the atmosphere became. Slowly, the same men who mocked him began to laugh at his jokes, applaud his singing, and treat him with a grudging respect. Davis later admitted that during those dark years, his ability to entertain literally kept him alive. Performing was the difference between enduring and being destroyed. But through all the violence and hostility, Davis held on to one source of hope: Frank Sinatra. Not Sinatra the man, but Sinatra the symbol. There was a short film Sinatra had made in 1945 called The House I Live In. It was only 10 minutes long, but its impact was enormous. In it, Sinatra stood in front of a group of school children and sang about tolerance, unity, and rejecting prejudice. At a time when America still lived by the rules of segregation, Sinatra's message was nothing short of defiant. The film earned him an honorary Oscar, but for Sammy Davis Jr., it was much more personal. He watched that film over and over, clinging to it like a lifeline. To him, Sinatra was speaking directly to Sammy, telling him that the world could change, that one voice could make a difference, and that respect was not an impossible dream. When Davis finally returned home after his service, he was changed. The racism had not broken him, it had sharpened him. He came back with scars, both physical and emotional, but also with a clearer sense of what he wanted his career to be. He was not going to settle for being a novelty act or a token black performer thrown on stage for a laugh. He wanted real respect, the kind he had seen Sinatra command night after night. The lessons he had learned in the army would become the foundation of his career: how to win over even the most hostile crowd, how to turn hate into applause. As Sinatra's star kept rising in Hollywood and Vegas, Davis knew one thing for certain: if he could just stay close to Sinatra, he would have a chance to break through barriers no one like him had ever crossed before. But staying close to Sinatra meant entering a world where politics, power, and loyalty mattered as much as talent. And in 1947, Davis would find out just how far Sinatra was willing to go to prove that his loyalty could change a man's career overnight. By 1947, Frank Sinatra was no longer just the skinny kid with a big voice. He was a phenomenon. His records were selling millions, his concerts were packed with screaming fans, and the press had already anointed him the voice. He had power now, real power, the kind that could make or break careers with a single decision. For Sammy Davis Jr., still grinding away in small clubs with the Will Maston Trio, the gap between them seemed enormous. Sammy had talent, no one doubted that, but he was trapped in the kind of circuit most black entertainers never escaped: long nights, small paychecks, and the constant reminder that no matter how good you were, the system was not built to let you win. When Sinatra was booked as the headliner at New York's prestigious Capitol Theater, he had the clout to demand exactly who would open for him. He could have chosen any of the dozens of established acts vying for that chance. Instead, he shocked everyone by insisting on the Will Maston Trio. It was not just a booking, it was a statement. The Capitol Theater was one of the most important stages in the country, and Sinatra was saying, if I'm headlining, Sammy Davis Jr. is part of the show. But Sinatra did not stop there. He demanded that the trio be paid 5 times their normal fee, an unheard of figure for a relatively unknown black act. Management resisted, but Sinatra made it clear this was not a negotiation. Either they paid Davis what Sinatra believed he deserved, or Sinatra himself would walk. Faced with losing their golden ticket, the theater caved. For Davis, the money was life-changing, but even more important was the message. Frank Sinatra had just forced the industry to treat him like a main attraction, not a sideshow. That night at the Capitol Theater, Davis was not just another opening act. For the first time, he stood in front of an audience that might never have discovered him otherwise. The crowd, already buzzing to see Sinatra, was introduced to Sammy's whirlwind of talent. His singing, his dancing, his impressions, his ability to own the stage with the same kind of confidence Sinatra himself displayed. It was the moment Davis had been waiting for, a real shot at showing the world what he could do. Backstage, Sinatra kept it low-key. He did not make grand speeches about racial justice or equality. He simply let his actions speak. By pulling Sammy onto that stage, by demanding fair pay, He had sent a message to every venue owner, every manager, and every audience member. This kid matters. And in an industry where doors were often slammed in the faces of black entertainers, Sinatra had just kicked one wide open. For Davis, the experience was both thrilling and sobering. He realized that being in Sinatra's orbit came with enormous opportunity, but also a dangerous dependency. Sinatra had the power to lift him into the spotlight, but it also meant Sinatra had the power to pull it away. Still, Davis was not naive. He knew that if he wanted to climb higher, he needed to hold on tight to Sinatra's friendship and prove that he belonged not just as an opening act, but as an equal. That chance would come soon, in a city where careers were made and destroyed in a single night. Las Vegas was calling, the neon kingdom of American entertainment. And while Davis dreamed of conquering it, he had no idea how deeply the city's rules of segregation would test both him and his friendship with Sinatra. By the early 1950s, Las Vegas was exploding into America's entertainment capital. Neon lights lined the Strip, casinos rose like temples in the desert, and the city marketed itself as a glamorous playground where stars and audiences could escape reality. For entertainers, Vegas was the proving ground. If you could conquer Vegas, you were immortal. For Sammy Davis Jr., it was the ultimate stage, the chance to finally break out of the vaudeville grind and prove he could stand shoulder to shoulder with the biggest names in show business. But there was one problem. Vegas was built on two sets of rules, one for white performers and another for black ones. On stage, black entertainers were welcome. They could headline a casino, dazzle the crowds, and fill the room with energy. But when the curtain fell, the same performers were treated like outsiders. They were not allowed to stay in the hotels where they performed. They could not eat in the main restaurants, and they were often forced to enter through back doors or kitchens.
We could not walk through the front. This is in Las Vegas, Nevada. And you could not eat in the restaurant. Forget gambling. You couldn't get up to a table. They wouldn't allow you in the casino. That's the truth.
Davis could headline a show that sold out every seat, but after the applause, he was expected to leave the Strip and sleep in a boarding house miles away. It was humiliation dressed up as policy, and for most entertainers, there was no fighting it. But Frank Sinatra was not most entertainers. By the mid-1950s, he was one of the most powerful forces in Vegas. When the Sands Hotel booked him, it was not just another show. It was a business deal casinos depended on to keep their doors open. Sinatra knew his worth, and he was not afraid to leverage it. So when management told Davis he could not stay at the Sands with the rest of the Rat Pack, Sinatra drew a line in the sand. He told them flat out, "If Sammy Davis Jr. does not stay here, neither do I." The casino bosses panicked. Losing Sinatra was not an option. He was too valuable, too iconic, and just like that, they caved. Davis checked into the Sands like any other headliner, breaking a barrier that had stood for decades. The move sent ripples across the Strip. Other casinos took notice, and slowly, grudgingly, policies began to shift. Black entertainers who had been forced to live in second-rate boarding houses were now being offered suites on the Strip. Segregation did not vanish overnight, but Sinatra's ultimatum cracked the system in a way no speech or protest could. It was raw power in action, wielded behind closed doors, but with effects that spread across the city. For Davis, it was more than just a victory. It was survival. Vegas was not just another stop on the tour. It was the center of his career. Without Sinatra's backing, he might have been sidelined or boxed into the same humiliating routines as countless other black performers. Instead, he was walking through the front door of the most glamorous hotels in America, standing on equal ground, at least publicly, with Sinatra, Dean Martin, and the rest of the Rat Pack. But that equality had its limits. Sinatra's loyalty gave Davis protection, but it also made the hierarchy clear. Sammy was powerful only as long as Sinatra said he was, and while audiences were starting to see Davis as a breakout star, the reality behind the scenes was far more complicated. Davis had won access, yes, but it was access granted, not freely given. By the late 1950s, Sinatra's orbit had transformed into something larger than a circle of friends. It was a cultural empire. The Rat Pack was not just a group of entertainers, it was the definition of cool. On stage, they blended music, comedy, and charisma into an unpredictable spectacle. Sinatra, Dean Martin, Joey Bishop, Peter Lawford, and Sammy Davis Jr. did not just perform, they made audiences feel like they were watching the greatest party in the world. The energy was electric, the jokes flew non-stop, the suits were sharp, and the chemistry looked effortless. For audiences, seeing Sammy Davis Jr. up there with Sinatra and Martin felt groundbreaking, proof that talent could erase boundaries. But what the crowd saw was not the full picture. Behind the glitz, the Rat Pack dynamic revealed the harsh realities of power and race. On stage, much of the humor targeted Davis directly. He was the shortest member of the group, the only black man in the lineup, and the one who absorbed the brunt of the edgy jokes. They called him Smokey, teased his appearance, and made cracks about his race in front of packed casinos. To the audience, it was all part of the act. Dangerous, unfiltered comedy that matched the Rat Pack's reputation for living without rules. Davis laughed along, firing back with his own quick wit. He had no choice. To show discomfort or anger in front of the crowd would risk looking weak, or worse, ungrateful. The press ate it up, calling the banter groundbreaking, modern, even refreshingly honest. But outside the neon glow of Vegas, the response was far more divided. In the African American community, especially among civil rights leaders, many saw Davis's willingness to tolerate those jokes as a betrayal. He was accused of being an Uncle Tom, of selling out his dignity to remain in a white-controlled circle. To critics, Davis was not breaking barriers. He was reinforcing stereotypes by laughing at them. The criticism cut deep. Davis almost never addressed it publicly, but privately, it weighed heavily. He knew the truth. Staying inside Sinatra's circle came with conditions. He could stand on stage as an equal, but the price of that equality was silence in the face of mockery. Still, Davis played the game because he understood the stakes. The Rat Pack was not just entertainment, it was access. By being part of the group, Davis was performing in front of presidents, mob bosses, Hollywood executives, and the most influential figures in America. He was not just singing, he was navigating a world of politics, money, and power that very few black entertainers ever reached. And even though the jokes stung, the opportunities were undeniable. But cracks in the friendship were already beginning to show. Davis knew the balance was fragile. He was riding high, but it all depended on Sinatra's favor. One misstep, one moment of crossing the line, and the door that had been opened for him could slam shut just as quickly. That test would come sooner than anyone expected, and when it did, it nearly ended the friendship for good. For years, Sammy Davis Jr. had walked a careful line inside Sinatra's world, grateful for the opportunities, careful not to upset the balance, and determined to keep proving he belonged. But in 1959, one small miscalculation nearly shattered everything he had built. Davis was booked to appear on a Chicago radio program called The Shay Show. It started innocently enough with lighthearted questions about his career, his admiration for Sinatra, and his success with the Rat Pack. But as the interview unfolded, Davis allowed himself a rare moment of honesty. He praised Sinatra as a mentor. Yes, but he also mentioned times when Sinatra's behavior could be too much, when his dominance and sharp temper made it difficult to stand as an equal. Davis did not rant, did not attack. He simply let slip a few words that hinted at criticism of a man the public thought he idolized without question. Those words traveled fast. Within days, Sinatra heard about the interview, and his reaction was explosive. He was a man who valued loyalty above all else, and to him, Davis's comments were an unforgivable betrayal. Multiple insiders later claimed that when Sinatra picked up the phone to call Davis, the conversation was brutal. The insults came fast, some reportedly racial in tone, and the message was clear. Davis had crossed a line, and there would be consequences. And consequences came swiftly. Davis was fired from the upcoming Sinatra-led film Never So Few, a major blow since Rat Pack movies were not just entertainment, they were career-defining cultural moments. Worse, Sinatra quietly used his influence to shut doors on Davis in Hollywood and Vegas. Calls went unanswered, gigs disappeared, and suddenly the man who had been the Rat Pack's shining symbol of inclusion was out in the cold. For Davis, it was like the lights of Las Vegas had gone dark. He had been given a seat at the table, and with one misstep, Sinatra had yanked the chair out from under him. Desperate, Davis tried everything to repair the damage. He sent letters of apology, reached out through mutual friends, and even attempted to speak to Sinatra face to face. Each time, he was shut down. Weeks dragged into months, and it became clear that only someone inside Sinatra's closest circle could possibly intervene. Finally, Dean Martin and Peter Lawford stepped in, urging Sinatra to reconsider. After long negotiations and plenty of persuasion, Sinatra relented, not out of forgiveness, but out of practicality. He needed Davis back for the filming of Ocean's 11, the Rat Pack's next big project. When Davis returned, the reunion was civil, but never quite the same. The laughter on stage continued. The public image of camaraderie was carefully maintained. But behind the curtain, things had changed forever. Davis himself admitted years later that he had crossed a line. In one revealing comment, he summed up the dynamic bluntly: "I know who's in charge, and I know where I stand." It was a confession of hierarchy, a recognition that the friendship the public celebrated was also a power arrangement. Sinatra could elevate him, protect him, and even bend the rules of Las Vegas for him. But Sinatra could also destroy him with a single phone call, and Davis now understood that more clearly than ever. Still, Davis chose to stay, because for all the tension and humiliation, there was no denying the reality. Sinatra's orbit was still the most powerful place in show business. Walking away was not an option. The 1960s did not just change music and culture, they reshaped America itself. The civil rights movement was no longer a background issue, it was front-page news. And suddenly, entertainers were not just expected to sing or act, they were expected to take a stand. For Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr., this new era pushed their friendship into the center of a national debate about race, politics, and power. Sinatra had always projected an image of independence, a man who refused to follow rules he did not believe in. In 1961, he put that reputation to the test by organizing a benefit concert for Martin Luther King Jr. at Carnegie Hall. It was a groundbreaking move, bringing mainstream entertainment directly into the fight for civil rights. Stars lined up to perform, and the event raised not only money but also awareness, signaling that Hollywood's elite were no longer content to stay silent. For Sinatra, who had grown up in Hoboken surrounded by immigrant struggles, supporting King felt like both a moral and personal cause. Sammy Davis Jr., by then a national star, went even further. He lent his voice and his presence to rallies and fundraisers, standing on stages where entertainers rarely dared to appear. To many in the movement, seeing Davis, one of the most visible black entertainers in America, standing with King was proof that change was possible. Yet, while Davis used his fame to push forward, he also remained tied to Sinatra, and with Sinatra came complications. Nowhere was this more obvious than in Las Vegas. Despite Sinatra's earlier ultimatum at the Sands, segregation had not simply vanished. Hotels still enforced racist policies, and casinos treated black guests and performers as second-class citizens. One night, at the Sands itself, a black couple was turned away at the door because of their skin color. Sinatra was furious. In the middle of his set, he stopped the music cold and demanded the policy be reversed immediately, or he would never perform there again. For Davis, watching this unfold was another reminder that Sinatra's loyalty was not performative. It was real, and it was costly. When Sinatra spoke, management listened, and once again, the rules began to bend. But while Sinatra used his influence for integration in Vegas, his political alliances brought new strain to Davis. During the 1960 presidential campaign, Sinatra became one of John F. Kennedy's loudest supporters. He rallied Hollywood stars, raised funds, and even helped connect Kennedy with powerful friends in Vegas. Sinatra assumed that once Kennedy won, his Rat Pack family, including Davis, would be embraced by the new administration. But Davis was about to find out how fragile progress could be. In 1960, Davis had fallen deeply in love with Swedish actress May Britt. Their relationship was bold for the time, an interracial couple at the peak of Hollywood fame. When the two announced their engagement, it sent shockwaves through both the press and political circles. Southern politicians fumed, newspapers churned out editorials, and Kennedy's campaign team panicked. They feared that Davis's presence at the inauguration, married to a white woman, would cost them support in the South. And so, with quiet but devastating finality, Davis's invitation to perform at Kennedy's inauguration was rescinded. For Davis, the rejection was crushing. To be excluded from such a historic moment, not because of his talent but because of his marriage, was a painful reminder that no matter how high he climbed, racism still cast a shadow. Sinatra, insiders said, was livid. He had delivered Hollywood's support to Kennedy, and in return, his closest friend was humiliated. From that point on, Sinatra's relationship with the Kennedy White House cooled dramatically, eventually collapsing altogether. By the late 1970s and into the 1980s, the glittering magic of the Rat Pack had begun to fade. The tuxedos and one-liners still looked sharp under the stage lights, but the men wearing them were no longer the invincible stars of the strip. Dean Martin's drinking was catching up with him, Sinatra's health was in decline, and Sammy Davis Jr., the once tireless whirlwind of energy, was showing signs of wear after decades of grinding tours. Audiences still cheered, but behind the curtain, the legends were getting older, weaker, and more aware that their time at the top was running out. In 1987, tragedy struck when Dean Martin's son died in a plane crash, sending the Rat Pack's most carefree member into a spiral of grief. The group tried to rally with one final tour. Sinatra, Davis, and Martin reunited on stage with Liza Minnelli joining as a guest star. For fans, it was advertised as a return to the glory days, a reminder of the nights when Vegas was their kingdom. But the reality was different. Martin's heart was not in it. Sinatra struggled with the strain of long performances, and Davis was battling what would soon be diagnosed as laryngeal cancer. The voices were not what they once were, and the jokes sometimes felt forced. But audiences did not care. They came to see living legends, men who had defined an era, and for a little while, they got just that. By 1989, Davis's health had worsened. The cancer made it difficult for him to sing, to speak, even to perform the routines that had once seemed effortless. But he refused to step away completely. He had spent his entire life on stage, and he was not ready to leave it behind. Sinatra, too, was fading. His once commanding presence was softening, his energy waning. Yet whenever Davis appeared, Sinatra made a point to be there. They were not just performers anymore, they were survivors, bound by decades of history that no one else could fully understand. On May 16, 1990, the end came. Sammy Davis Jr. lost his battle with cancer at the age of 64. News of his death spread quickly, and tributes poured in from across the entertainment world. But for Sinatra, the loss was personal in a way that words could barely capture. He canceled all his scheduled shows, boarded a plane to California, and joined the mourners gathering to say goodbye to the man who had been his brother-in-arms for nearly half a century.
Mr. Sinatra, we know this is a sad time for everyone right now. How do you think Sammy should be remembered?
Well, from my standpoint, he should be remembered as one of the finest human beings I ever knew in my life.
At the funeral, Sinatra was not content to sit silently in the front row. He walked with the casket, serving as a pallbearer, carrying Davis one last time. When it came time to speak, people expected Sinatra to deliver a polished, emotional eulogy filled with anecdotes and reflections. Instead, he offered just one sentence. He said, "It's hard to sum up a friendship of more than 40 years in a few words. I wish the world could have known Sammy the way I did." That single line cut through decades of speculation, gossip, and controversy. It was not defensive. It was not calculated. It was raw. For all the power games, the betrayals, the jokes, and the criticism, Sinatra's final words revealed the truth of a bond that had survived it all. He did not try to rewrite history or explain away the messy parts. He simply expressed a private loyalty that had outlasted the spotlight. Their friendship was never simple. It was a story of loyalty and betrayal, opportunity and sacrifice, power and survival. Sinatra opened doors for Davis that no other star could, but he also reminded him who controlled those doors. Davis endured criticism, humiliation, and moments of deep pain to hold his place in a world where one misstep could end it all. Yet through decades of laughter, politics, and controversy, their bond endured. And when Davis was gone, Sinatra's final words, "I wish the world could have known Sammy the way I did," cut through all the rumors. In the end, theirs was not a perfect friendship, but it was one that changed Hollywood, broke barriers, and left a legacy no one could ignore.
I just walked in heaven, floating lightly, because I had met this man and he remembered me.